All right, welcome to the fourth lecture on the Freudian Unconscious and the return to Freud. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing one of Freud's most interesting papers in his early career. It's a paper called On Dreams from 1901. It's a paper that was published a year after the Interpretation of Dreams, which was published in 1900 and was really a landmark work in Freud's career. Connecting his interest in neuroses and hysteria to his interest in dreams, and also further developing the psychoanalytic method in its utility, not to just sort of uncovering symptomatic behaviors in neurotic and hysteric patients, but also in its application to our dreams. Without further ado, I'm going to share the screen. Oh, just a sec. Just a sec. The screen I want to share is not available right now. There we go. Okay. So on Dreams from 1901. So in this paper, Freud is basically, I think, employing a dialectical method in thinking. He is aware that dreams have been studied and of interest to human populations since there have been records of humans writing about various phenomena. Ancient humans were fascinated by dreams, and they attributed dreams to the realm of supernatural explanation. So for the ancients, dreams were basically explained through recourse to a higher power, usually associated with a demonic power or a divine power, and that if one paid attention to dreams, one would be in touch with almost a higher force, whether of an evil nature or of a higher spiritual nature. So basically, in the pre-scientific universe, dreams had a mythological significance. Moving into the natural science era, all recourse to supernatural explanation was, of course, critiqued, and there was a skeptical attitude towards supernatural explanation. Dreams were handed over to psychology, which basically meant that the hypothesis was that in order to explain dreams, we have no more recourse than to look at our own psyches, at our own minds. The psyche was the object of analysis, and at the same time, the psychology profession did not have a theory about some of the most interesting dimensions of the dream that were previously covered by mythological interpretation. So, for example, the dream as mystery would be, what is the origin of the dream? What is the relationship of the dream to waking mental life? If you're not going to say that the gods or the demons are talking to us, then what is the relationship? What is the force of the dream's perception? What is the force of the dream upon our perception during sleep? In dreams, we experience crazy visions, paradoxical and contradictory information, strange speech. What is this force and how does it affect our day-to-day waking life? And yet finally, just connected to that, the peculiarities of the content. Usually the types of logic and the types of scenes that are presented to us in dreams are very counterintuitive and very strange in relationship to our normal perception and our normal life. Freud was interested basically in how do we as natural scientists, as people who are in the scientific universe, how do we approach dreams from the level at which the pre-scientific era tried to approach dreams? So here he was engaging with various hypotheses of the dream's significance. On the one hand, he was entertaining mystical explanations of the dream, which would be kind of more related to the romanticists, like the idealists and the romanticists of the 19th century, would see the dream as a product of the psyche, but also like in the scientific hypothesis, but they would see it as, you know, they would idealize the psyche. So for example, the dream was a liberation from external nature. It was a place in which we had access to the mind or the soul, free from all of our sensations, free from our thought, free from our sight, our smell, our touch, our taste, which were tethered to the world. And we would have mind independent of all these sensations. And that the dream was an expanded mental force. It was, again, I think the most simplest way to describe it is that the mystical explanation of the dream was an idealization of the dream. And then on the other hand, you'll have the medical explanation for the dream. So that dreams were not necessarily some higher level of the mind free from the senses, but actually recollections of sensory and somatic stimuli, which were repeating themselves inside the dreamer's mind, and that these somatic sensory repetitions were not of a intelligent or meaningful nature, but rather they were totally random, chaotic, and senseless. So the dream had no deeper significance or deeper meaning. So on the one hand, you have the mystics who are saying that it's a higher level of the psyche. And on the other hand, you have the medical scientists who are saying it's random, incoherent, chaotic information that is just leftover sensory residue from the day. For Freud, he has an interesting hypothesis in relationship to these two, which is that the popular account of dreams, the folk psychology of dreams, was, in his view, nearest to the truth, but that it involved too much superstition. So in other words, what Freud's saying is that he does think that dreams have a meaning, but that in order to understand what this meaning is, we have to get rid of all of the folk psychological superstition around it, and we have to learn how to approach this in a more systematic way with a more modern method. And of course, he's going to use psychoanalytic method to get at this meaning of the dream. So he applies psychoanalytic method to the dream. What he makes the connection, and the reason why he starts to make this connection, is that he makes a quite, I think, clever jump between his original interest in phobias and obsessions. So remember, for a decade here, Freud was studying neurotic patients. And in studying neurotic patients, he not only stumbles upon the psychoanalytic method in terms of helping them, but also comes to realize that there's something alien, and those are his words, that there's something alien about the nature of the unconscious as it works with these phobias and obsessions. And he makes the connection that it might be that dreams are of a similar nature, that just like phobias and obsessions are something alien to normal consciousness, he says dreams are also something alien to normal consciousness. And so he's really applying a method to help the ego approach something quote unquote alien. He also makes the connection that in regards to phobias and obsessive symptoms, their recovery is found in bringing to consciousness something which was concealed from consciousness. And he makes that connection because it might be also applicable to the dream. That in the dream, we all know that we often forget our dreams, or we only remember fragments of our dreams. There's a type of, and at the same time, we have the impression that there was something more to the dream than we can recall in our normal waking consciousness. So there's a type of concealment at work. And he, again, finds this link because he had been working with the same form of concealment when it comes to neurotic patients. So the basic method he applies, and I think it's something that's so simple and so basic, that, we should all take notice of how how useful it is to stumble upon a simple method and to apply it to things that we're all familiar with in our day-to-day life, which is to take notice of whatever occurs in the mind without any exception and to report it. He says that the main resistance to this method is the ego's critical judgment. So when it comes to the phobic or the obsessional patient, the critical ego judgment is not necessarily willing to go into this taking notice of whatever's in the mind. They're more willing to discount it or displace it or to repress it. And he's saying that this same method has to be applied to the dream, and that when you apply it to the dream, you can follow a chain of associations, and following this chain of associations without critical judgment allows one to get closer to the meaning of the dream, which we'll go into in more depth. So analysis applied to the dream, just like I was saying, you follow a train of associations from the memory of a dream, and you bring light connections which were not visible in the dream itself as you remember it. So you wake up from a dream, you have an image of a dream, you say, I remember X, Y, or Z, and then you try to, through free association, follow the chain of connections, and from that, you reveal parts of the dream which had become concealed from your waking consciousness. What he says is discovered in this activity is that there are connections which have a psychological meaning for the subject, but they cannot be reduced to the normal brain activity. In other words, he's discounting the medical scientist hypothesis that this is just physical brain activity with no meaning, it's random, it's senseless. He's saying there is a meaning here. It's not necessarily of a higher psychological functioning like the idealists are saying, but nonetheless, there is a meaning that has a psychological significance. So it's worth going in and exploring the meaning of dreams. What he's saying this meaning is again, not the idealist hypothesis of the higher level functioning, but it's rather that there is, the function of a dream was a type of substitute, a shorter substitute for a type of meaning and emotion which was too high of an excitation for the normal consciousness. So the memory, in other words, the memory of the dream, what it was concealing was a meaningful and emotional experience which was too much for the consciousness to handle, basically. So I'm going to leave on that part and then open up conversation, and before I go into part two. I'm gonna just lost Rashanik there, it looks like, and Dimitri's joining us too. So Dimitri, Rashanik, I think I lost you, Rashanik. Dimitri, I just went over part one of On Dreams. But yeah, for those of you who were joining me, I just encourage, jump in if you have anything to say. What for me, I'm interested in this part was the way in which Freud spontaneously sets up a useful dialectical frame to start his analysis. On the one hand, he's dealing with the idealists who are saying that the dream has a higher level of functioning and a higher level of sort of mental spirit. And then on the other hand, he's dealing with the medical natural scientists who are saying that the dream is meaningless, the dream is just random sensation. And by setting up this dialectical method, he attempts to situate himself sort of in a way that he transcends both and opens up a new interesting vista. So it's not that the dream contains a higher level of spirit, like direct connection with God or something like that. And it's not that the dream is just some random brain activity. It's rather that the dream is something which has been manufactured by the ego, which we'll get into, and that you can follow it through a chain of associations down to some type of meaning which has a psychological significance as it relates to the subject's emotional history. So I just think that that's a genius. I mean, that's how he's starting this paper. I'm not sure how you guys are interpreting the start of this paper if you've read it, but feel free to jump in.
Okay, I'll say something. I thought it sounded like he's saying it's almost like a slip, like the gap between the signifier and the signified. And I thought that seemed like an interesting sort of hypothesis. And I think also neuroscience now tends to agree with him that that's the closest they've been able to get to any sort of any of their scientific data at this point too. But I wonder what you thought about the gap between the signified and the signifier. Like a dream, you know, so like even in normal therapy, you can almost do dream analysis with somebody on like a free associate to each sort of image or each sort of aspect of what they're saying. Does that make sense?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think that I think that that will become evident that maybe the deeper we go into it, but like in the paper as a whole, when we're thinking about the way in which he makes the separation between latent and manifest dream content, there is a gap between there is this fundamental gap between the signifier and the signified in some sense. It's kind of like the dream content in itself is fundamentally concealed from the dreamer, and that the work of the signifier is to sort of uncover or unconceal this.
Because I'm thinking it's more like rather than unconceal, it's more creating, because it's not like it's hidden to be discovered. Like something repressed isn't necessarily then discovered as something hidden. It's more like created in that moment to make sense for that person. Roshanek, help me. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like there's something there hidden to be pulled out, but you can free associate to this image, free associate to that image, and then that person is able then to make some links in the moment rather than discover something that's already existing. I don't know, I'm just asking.
Well, in the paper, Freud's, I mean, it is in the moment. I mean, the act of free association and the dream interpretation is in the moment. You know, but it is also that the content that's being worked with is the content of the previous day in terms of the actual dream content, but then the emotional excitation which is discovered is usually of a memory of an emotional excitation in the subject's deeper history. And that is discovered in the moment, and then that would have a meaning for the psychological entity in the present moment. But that's going deeper into the paper. So, you know, just you know, I don't think we've gotten to that part of the paper. Like, so, but just like in the part that I've been presenting here, it's kind of like sort of setting up this dialectical tension between the idealist mystical interpretation on the one hand and the scientific rationalist on the other hand, and sort of, you know, the way he handles these two interpretations, I think, was in particular ingenious. So maybe I should go deeper into the paper. I'm gonna go deeper into the paper. All right, so focusing on part 2. So Freud introduces 2 basic distinctions between manifest content and latent content. So the manifest content is basically content which is retained in the memory of the ego. So this is, the manifest content is the dream that you hold on to, you know, as soon as you wake up, and maybe you'll remember fragments or bits and pieces throughout the day. You know, the manifest content is the dream, you know, you tell your friend, you know, I had this crazy dream last night. That's the manifest content. The latent content is the material that you can only discover through analysis, Freud is saying. Basically through this free association mechanism, and basically through this following a chain of associations of the manifest content. So you get this impression here right away that there's a type of concealment which has gone on in the dream itself. So he immediately asks the question, what is the process transforming latent to manifest content? And what are the unconscious motives for this transformation? 2 very simple questions. He's interested in the mechanism by which the dream you remember becomes the dream you remember. And he's interested in if there's any underlying motives for why this transformation takes place. He calls the process through which latent turns into manifest, quote unquote, the dream work, and the process which transforms manifest to latent, the analysis. So there you have this 2-part process, which is, I think, important to focus on. One, where the dream is doing the work, and that happens unconsciously, automatically every night. And then you have the opposite process, where the manifest is transformed back into the latent, and that's through the chain of associations in analytic method. He says that in regards to the latent dream content, the key is in contradictory or incoherent, incorrect views on dreams. And that's also the key to the psychoanalysis of dreams itself. So what that means is that the reason why there's so much confusion, both in the idealistic and in the scientific world about dreams, is that no one is aware of this basic process of latent content being transformed into manifest content. They don't understand that this process takes place. No one understands how this process takes place. And as a result, there are people on some sides who say that the dreams are just incoherent nonsense. And there are people on the other hand who say the dreams are these meaningful idealistic phenomena. From this basic category of latent manifest content, he then starts to categorize 3 different forms of dreams. So the first form of dreams are dreams that both make sense and are intelligible. So the dreams are fully, the dreams are fully sensical, fully intelligible. There's no incoherence, there's no contradiction, there's no fuzziness, there's no sort of missing pieces, as it were. The second style of dream is that they make sense, but they're not intelligible. In other words, you can have a sensory picture of the dream, but you don't understand the meaning of the dream. It doesn't seem intelligent. It seems chaotic. It seems random. It seems non-intelligent. And then the third category of dreams is where the dream has no sense and it's not intelligible at all. So the interesting thing about this progress from dreams that make sense and are intelligible to dreams that make no sense and are not intelligible is that he claims that for category 1, this is most children's dreams. So most children's dreams, he claims, they do make sense and they are intelligible. And then as it regards to, and that from this knowledge, the dream reveals itself as basically a a clear wish fulfillment of previous days' unfulfilled wishes, intensities. So basically what's happening in a child's dream is that wishes are being fulfilled in the dream itself, which were unfulfilled in the previous, what he calls dream day. And that this is basically most children's dreams. He says adults move slowly into category 3, which is basically as we get older, our dreams start to make less sense and our dreams start to be less intelligible. And that the way in which you can understand the wish fulfillment of the dream is only through analysis. So you see here basically that as we become adults, what he's saying is that our dreams conceal more and more our wish fulfillments. So it's kind of scary, and it gets kind of scarier. And you can already see here the larger developmental picture he's framing, which I want to emphasize because it's so important, which is that if our dreams are wish fulfillments, which are replaying the previous day's dream, basically unfulfilled dream material, you can imagine then that as we become adults, as we get closer and closer to adulthood, there is more and more dream concealment because there's more and more unfulfilled wishes. In other words, reality becomes more difficult. We become further and further away from our dreams, and they build up, and all of that frustration builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up, and the dream starts to conceal itself more and more and more and more. So it's a very basic, very clear mechanism he's identifying here on the difference between children's dreams and adults' dreams. So how the dream work carries itself out, this is, again, the dream work is from latent to manifest content, is through a process of compression and condensation. So, and he also identifies a logical operator in this compression and condensation, which is really important. It's the function of and. So I would use even the function of the logical operators of both and. So this is very important to focus on because it changes the logic of the dream. So usually when it comes to identity in our normal waking consciousness, it's either or. You can either be this identity or that identity. I can be Cadell or I could be Mads, but I can't be both Cadell and Mads at the same time. Whereas in a dream, the dream does not operate on this function. The dream functions on the function of and. So if it has two contradictory images, it will condense them into one image, and you'll have a contradictory image, and the dream does not recognize that as a contradiction. It just superimposes many different images. And this is where you get contradictory images. This is where you get images that we see as non-logical. So it's kind of like a superimposition of common elements, and it creates a collective composite frame or image. And these images are not found, he says, in waking perception. He says that the shortest route to the resolution of the dream drama is to identify the common X in this contradictory image. So if you have a bunch of superimposed images which seem contradictory, if you can find the common element between the contradictions, you can move through these contradictions. And basically what you're doing is you're undoing the dream work with analysis. So the dream work has built this contradictory image, and through analysis, you're untangling this contradictory web. And the buildup of the condensation has been built up through the function of and you are doing the reverse process in the dream analysis. So he then introduces one of the functions of this dream work, which he calls dream displacement. So the dream displacement is when latent dream thoughts get transformed into manifest dream content, which are unrecognizable. So this is dream displacement. So basically the dream you remember has been displaced from its original psychical meaning. And this displacement can sometimes be really dramatic. So you could have a dream, for example, about, I don't know, being on an airplane It could be anything. You have a dream, you remember you were on an airplane, but there's something weird happening on the airplane. And if you followed that chain of associations for something weird on the airplane, it would take you to the original dream thoughts, which have nothing to do with an airplane. So this would be the displacement. The displacement. And then again, linking this back to the three categories of dreams he's talking about. In category 1, where you have no dream displacement and you just have a simple, clear wish fulfillment. Again, this is most children's dreams. And then in category 3, which is most adults, you have extreme displacement. So basically, as we get older, our dreams, again, there's more and more dream displacement because there's been more and more censorship by our ego, you could say. So the undoing of dream displacement, he says, what it reveals are the motives of the dream and also the connection of the dream to waking life, what he calls the dream day. So if there was something in your day which didn't go well, your dream is going to try to fulfill this wish. And in order to keep you sleeping, the dream is going to conceal this wish through dream displacement. That's the basic, that's the basic mechanism he's introducing there. So I could go into part 3, but I've got 4 parts. So I guess my plan right now is I'm going to stop, because now we've identified this basic mechanism of the dream, hopefully we can go into. And then I'll do parts 3 and 4, maybe at the top of the hour. So for me, if anyone wants to jump in, you can. For me, the interesting thing here is, again, he's identifying this connection between latent and manifest dream content. He's claiming basically that this basic mechanism of from latent to manifest dream content is the fact that this is a new mechanism is the reason why there's so much confusion about the nature of dreams. That people who think dreams are incoherent and meaningless don't understand that this process is occurring of dream displacement and condensation, and it operates on a contradictory logic and so forth. And also that this process gets more intense as we get older. So it makes it harder for us to understand the nature of dreams, because the people who would be interested in studying dreams are adults, and adults are by nature in this third category of the dream, where there's a lot of dream displacement, where the origin of the wish fulfillment of the dream has been concealed, and you need a mechanism to follow it back to its original intent, to basically do the work of analysis. So I think it's again, this is, it's fascinating. It's such a fascinating paper.
Yeah, I've got a question about displacement, because it kind of fucks me up, you know? Like, when is a dream analysis finished? When can you say, okay, this is what it meant. These are all the elements. This is the latent. This is, I've got everything. You can always say, no, but maybe that's display or something like that. So I wonder, how do you...
I think that Freud in this paper suggests that it has something to do with the the sensibility and the intelligibility of the dream, and that the sensibility, and once the sensibility and the intelligibility of the dream is, it's no longer has contradictory images, it's no longer presenting these weird composite images, that you're getting closer at least to the source or the motive of it. And also that it's a clear wish fulfillment. So that to him is the singularity. So once you reach a simple wish, a simple desire, then you've reached the core of it. So
maybe that's just wrong.
Sorry?
Maybe it's just wrong. That can also happen, right? Maybe the analyst is projecting his wish fulfillment.
Yeah, there is in in his 1915 book, Introductory to Psychoanalysis, he does have a whole section responding to people who critique him for reducing the dream and reducing the unconscious to a wish fulfillment. But Freud is, in Freud's view, in his work and his dream analysis leads us back to wish fulfillment, and that gives us the most simple, stable interpretation of the dream's motive. And it also allows him to build the theory of how displacement gets more and more intense in adults. So I guess one of his best evidence for his theory would be that in children's dreams, there's less of these complications because there's less buildup of frustration that's gone on, and there's less censorship. It's kind of more like, it's kind of like how children are less guarded and children can more just speak their mind. I'm always blown away when I meet a young child and they just come up and tell you something which is offensive. Like they'll just tell you something about yourself which an adult wouldn't do because of they're basically, trying to maintain appearances. But a child will just come up and say, for example, you gained a lot of weight. Or they'll come up and say, you look old, right? Like they'll just come up and say it, right? So like what Freud's saying is that in children's dreams, there's less censorship. And because there's less censorship, there's less concealment and there's less displacement. So you can more clearly see the nature of the dream. And he's saying that as adults get older, and especially in neurotic patients, the dream gets more complex and confusing. And this is why we're confused about the nature of dreams. But he claims that through analysis, you can also get back to this simple origin, which is a wish fulfillment. And of course, there are people who disagree with Freud.
He would be suggesting that the client and the analysand would be the person who'd be doing the free association, not the analyst. So when Dimitri asked about perhaps the analyst is wrong, it would be the client that would be doing the free association, yes?
Yes, I think,
Yeah. I guess, but doesn't analyst draw conclusions like Freud does with his theory?
His own dreams mainly. So I guess they would too. Well, I don't know. I guess each analyst would be different, and Cadell can probably have, a good understanding of it. But for me, I wouldn't be. I'd be asking the person.
See, I'm just wondering if this idea of working back to the wish fulfillment, or the wish actually to the wish, it's an approximation always. It is never the wish. We never know the wish. So you see, it's almost like this trajectory where I'm wondering the child's dream is much more less concealed, less displaced. And my fantasy is that like the infant's dream must be absolutely no, So it's something around, being born into life, and the more we live, the more layers are formed, the more concealment, the more displacement, the more, because of the fact that we are kind of evolving, but becoming more complex. And so, yeah, I think in my sense is that what you said, Dimitri, about displacement, where do you get to it? I think you approximate and you make meaning, but do you get to the wish in itself? I don't think so.
That's so interesting.
I don't know, that's just a theory.
It's so interesting, like Freud is so daring and genius. Because when I'm dreaming and have weird dreams, I'm just like totally confused. I don't even know where to go. And I know like displacement, condensation, but where do you even start, And yeah,
I mean, you make the meaning you want, in a way, like having done a lot of my own dream analysis and patient, works with patients. I don't think there is a true analysis. I think the meaning, like, that, I think it's so, it's not either or, it's both and. So maybe the thing that sticks, that feels right, but then that could be another form of concealment. So I think it's
exactly
difficult.
I think just for a moment, like Dimitri said, where do you start? For Freud, he's like, when you have all this displacement and condensation, Freud's saying where you start is in the common element between contradictory images. So if you have like an image, which is both and, like, for example, a superimposed image of like a farm in an ocean, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, there's a farm in an ocean, like that you would never see a farm in an ocean in real life. You'd have to find the common element between the farm and the ocean, which what the dream work has done is combine two unrelated dream thoughts into one image using the function of and. So it's both and. That's the logic of the dream work. But the logic of the analysis is reverse. You have to undo the dream work. That's the whole mechanism, is you have to undo the dream work to get to the dream thoughts. And that he's saying that you can do that through finding the common element in the contradiction. And then where you should be led back is a simple wish, which is not contradictory in itself. So, and he's saying that, like you're saying, Rashanik, that these layers build up and these layers and layers build up and build up and build up.
So the wish, what's the wish?
Well, we get to that at the very end of the paper. He tells us, of course, classic Freud, that the origin of the wish is an erotic impulse.
It's a drive.
It's a drive. It's a drive. So, like, for example, the origin, like the wish fulfillment, the three signifiers I'm using more and more is eat, fuck, kill. Eat, fuck, kill. These are just simple drives, simple impulses. And these get filtered through, these simple impulses, they're never just animalistic instincts. They're always being filtered through a certain horizon of signifiers. And so that is kind of, and of course, these basic drives are drives that are always thwarted as we get older. We have to conceal these basic impulses more and more and more. And we have to conceal these impulses more and more and more in order to have civilization. So, like, that brings us also to the logic of Freud's civilization and its discontents. Because you have to have some, if we were just going around eating, fucking, and killing each other, obviously we would have no civilization.
No, but
so there has to be this, but there's this, but he's saying, like, at the same time, he's saying this, that we get to the truth of this through the child, because the child can just spontaneously speak things which the adult struggles to bear. It's almost like we cover ourselves up in an image just so we can feel safe in a world which actually doesn't see us and doesn't really care about us. So we cover ourselves up in an image which basically it's basically our mode of censoring ourselves. And he's not saying therefore we should just let out all of our aggressive urges or something like that, but more that unless we know what is in our own minds through analysis, we are going to unconsciously enact these impulses in strange ways, because the information still needs to reach our consciousness. So like, for example, the classic example would be like the priest who's dedicated his life to religion, but then he has sex with little boys. Right? Like this is an enormous concealment. Right? This is an enormous concealment.
I don't know. Am I? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through.
Okay. I don't know, like my spontaneous thought about what dreams are would be that it's mainly like fulfillment of unfulfilled desires, as you say.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, I think I would not exclude that there is room for some kind of mystical space in dreams as well, but I think that I tend to think of it as like fulfilling of desires without falling.
Can you go into what you mean by that?
Yeah. Yeah, in that sense that the desires can be fulfilled through the dream without having to do the fall in real life.
That's what he's saying, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I'm thinking that it seems like, okay, so the basic first desire might be to return to the womb, and it gets more and more scattered into all kinds of like desires scattered in some sense. Unconsciously, we desire this and that and this and that, instead of like a focused, pure desire in some sense. And what I find interesting is that people like Osho, I see he argues that he has no, he doesn't need to dream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So exactly what you're saying. Yeah. So like this is the magic in it. It may not be like Freud would never say like this method is the only way to do it, but what he is saying is that there's a way in which the discovery of the original dream thoughts allows you to fulfill the desire without doing it in real life. And then once you've uncomplicated your dreams, like if your dreams are extremely complex and confusing, that means you're in this type 3 category and there's a huge repression which needs to be uncovered. But if you're in a space where your dreams are very simple and basic, he's saying that's closer to the core of the dream. And like I totally believe someone like Osho would not even need to dream.
But isn't it a little bit more complex than that? Like, say, when you were saying about the priest having sex with a boy, that's the hidden thing. Wouldn't the hidden aspect be the guilt that he felt, and therefore the dream could likely even be something, a punishing dream? So
I think
the hidden aspects. So the hidden aspect's not that he's having sex with a boy. The hidden aspect is the self-punishment that he might then seek out.
Well, the sex with the boy, the priest having sex with the boy would be the truth of the subject. But like if I'm talking about the concealment would be him as a priest. Like that's
but it's not concealed from him.
Well, it's the concealment in the appearance. How he appears to you is as a priest.
Mm-hmm.
But the
so
truth is sorry.
So then wouldn't the dream would be more about his guilt, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't know. Okay, so I'd be totally speculating because we're not analyzing a priest's dream, but like I would imagine that like
I'm just trying to say about the wish fulfillment. I don't think it's so necessarily always just like, oh, I want to have an ice cream. I dream about an ice cream. I think it's a little bit more convoluted.
Yeah, it is convoluted. That's what I'm saying. It's convoluted. The dream itself is convoluted. So if you want an ice cream, you wouldn't have a dream about an ice cream. Not if you're in only if you were in type 1 of dreams. So if you were in type 1 of dreams, if you wanted an ice cream, you would dream about an ice cream. Say the previous day say you were 5 years old and you went out with your dad and you wanted an ice cream and your dad said you can't have an ice cream. That night, Freud would hypothesize that you would dream about having an ice cream. But if you're 25, you're 35 or you're 45, the dream would become more and more convoluted. So if you wanted an ice cream and you couldn't have an ice cream, you would be dreaming about I don't know, it could be anything. Like you'd be dreaming about being on a stage somewhere, something is going on which is totally unrelated to ice cream, but like someone in the audience has an ice cream. So Freud would say that you'd have to follow that association back to the original wish. But the dream itself in regards to being in the type 3 of dreams is a pure concealment. And even he's saying, like, to take that further, like back into real life, is that adults themselves are concealment. Like the actual appearance of an adult as their normal egoic persona is a concealment. And that is in relation to deference of the deference of desire. It's a necessary deference of desire. It's a necessary constraining of desire. It's a necessary path that we have to walk in order to become adults at all. Because if we didn't do it, we would never have even survived to this point.
If I could, I would like to ask about the sort of 3 categories that were laid out with latent and manifest, because it seems like there's a category missing, like the intelligible nonsense category. And is that even a possibility within Freud's framework? Is there something about the way he's making the distinction between intelligibility and sense making that prevents there from being a 4th category of dreams or a 4th category of latent manifest relationality?
Yeah, there is that asymmetry. I'm trying to think about why there would be this asymmetry in his classification in regards to sense and intelligibility. My first guess would be related to the logic of the function of the dream work itself. So the logic of the function of the dream work itself, he said, is operating on this function of both and. So as soon as the dream work has started, our basic classical logic can no longer make it intelligible. Because in order for the dream work if there's any dream work that has started, it's already put you into contradictory logic. So it's already difficult for our classical intelligence. But he is saying, like, I guess on the other hand, he is saying that even a non-intelligible dream is intelligent, but it's intelligent in a logic which is foreign to, which is not the classical logic we like working with, which would be either or. Like you can't have a farm on an ocean or something like that.
So intelligibility then is, or rather, that's in, so either it's intelligibility or it's sense making that breaks the law of the excluded middle, but I'm not clear which one it is.
Can you explain that again, or go
like,
deeper?
That you can't have, so for classical logic, you can't have something and its negation simultaneously be the case, but that is kind of done by these superimpositions.
Yes.
But where does that fall? Like that, So that's the law of the excluded middle, at least from what I recall.
Yes, yes.
And where does that fall? Does that fall into sense making, or that falls into intelligibility, because it has to do with our logical schematization of the dream?
I'm guessing that would be my guess on his logic of these categories.
So you could have a sort of, what is it, like a dialethist like logic that includes the excluded middle,
Yes.
includes the middle term, that would allow for an intelligible, that would make, for a logician who's doing non-classical logic, there would be an intelligibility to a nonsensical dream.
I think if we're not using classical logic and we're using the dream's logic, then the dream is intelligible at all levels. Does that what do you think? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be for the analysis to work. So the analysis has to make itself, it has to operate according to a non-classical logic.
Yeah, I think that the dream even on the third level is intelligent, but the intelligence of the dream is concealment. Like it's intelligent in its mode of concealment. And its purposes, and we're going to go deeper into what the purposes of the dream are, but he says at the end of the paper that the purposes of the dream is to keep you sleeping. So the concealment is intelligent because what it's trying to do is keep you asleep, and that's what it wants to do.
That's exactly what I was thinking with like without the fall. I mean, you can keep your scaffolding. You don't have to. I mean, you don't have to deconstruct your identity in some sense. Seems like that to me.
Right. Can you go deeper into you don't have to deconstruct your identity?
Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going, but again, I'm thinking again of like the dream is a place where you can fulfill your desire without having to die, like you say sometimes, die again, die better. So you can do it. I mean, you can sustain your identity in that way. So in that sense, it seems like dreams are sustaining the scaffolding of identity.
Yeah, he uses actually, like, I guess this takes me to like the end of the paper where he uses the metaphor of the dream as like a night watchman, which is keeping a city asleep. And like the dream will only wake you up if the night watchman sees an enemy at the gates, which it can't deal with itself. So like it's not about, he's not like, in some sense, Freud, like understanding what he's saying deeply, I think can lead you to a kind of conservative viewpoint, like basically that you can maintain your adult identity as a concealment, but that your adult identity as a concealment can become more real if you're simultaneously in touch with the core of your dream in some sense.
Yes.
Like you don't need to go from like a repressed, unconscious adult to a totally unrepressed sort of free, chaotic entity. You know, like that is kind of those are false choices of options. Like you can be restrained, you can be a normative adult and be in touch with the core of your dream at the same time. It's just that I guess the hypothesis would be that the concealment of your adulthood would be more authentic and less susceptible to disruption in some sense. Like you're more true. Like you have maybe you could say that it's like the synthesis of a true concealment. Like it's like this paradox of truth and appearance, like how in Hegel, truth and appearance are can be the same thing. Like that, you can have a true concealment in some sense.
Okay.
Like I guess even for example, as the example of a priest, like a priest could be true. Like I'm saying that if a priest is having sex with a little boy, then the truth is where he's having sex with a little boy.
Mhm.
But if the priest is actually integrated within himself, like you could have a true priest. Like you can have a true guru. Like you could say Osho was a true guru because he's not like his truth was already on display. Like he acted out his sexuality with consciousness.
Yes.
Are we also, I'm sorry to interrupt you, if that's all right. Do you hear me? Well,
Yeah, you're coming through.
yeah.
Feel free.
Are we also, I mean, I came a bit late, so I don't know if you were already talking about this, but are we already also talking about the kind of way that we, in a normal waking consciousness, how we approach our dreams? That's another issue. That's so basically what Freud starts off with is that we must take notice of whatever occurs to us when we are observing our strange and incorrigible thoughts that come up when we are thinking about our dreams. So the basic counterintuitive move is to just not dismiss the kind of shit that comes up as some kind of worthless rubbish when we are talking about our dreams. So that's really difficult, but that's basically what we had to start off with. And when Marx was saying that we might end up sort of deconstructing or destroying our identity, well, doesn't that more pertain to the way that we in our civilized normal self, we approach our dreams? So Freud is presenting in the early part of the paper his own dream where he gets to some point where he says that basically up to so far and not beyond anymore. This is, I don't go any further. He says that there is some kind of nodal point from which he cannot anymore go further, because he would have to go too deep into personal issues and might get lost about the whole project. So basically there are two issues here going on. In our dreams, we have some kind of mystical or perhaps nonsensical stuff going on all the time, and in our waking life we can translate them into our waking thoughts, but the difficulty is that do we actually approach it like that? Well, that's the thing that Freud starts off with. I don't think that there is anybody really in pre-Freud era who really approaches dreams in this way, although I think that maybe he's in a perverse way he is Aristotelian in a way, since he tries to gather up the material and observe them very, very objectively, and then discover some kind of turning point from which he can then enable us to have some kind of systematic framework for our dreams. It's very Aristotelian idea, I think. But yeah, I think that there's the waking life consciousness in which we are not allowed to really approach the dreams. There is some kind of gatekeeper or some kind of sign, do not enter. And then there is the actual dream work, and in the dream there can be all kinds of things going on, like all kinds of nonsense.
I think the core thing for me that you're hitting on is like which I did bring up so far, but we haven't really gone fully deep into it, is this distinction between the manifest dream content, which can appear to the critical ego as just rubbish.
Yeah.
Like worthless rubbish. And then in order to get to the actual wish fulfillment, you have to be able to override your own critical ego judgment and free associate with things that you think is rubbish. And that is where a lot of the defenses come in.
Yeah, that's true. There's a really good quote here that I could read. Freud says at the beginning part that there is an intimate and regular relation between the unintelligible and confused nature of dreams and the difficulty of reporting the thoughts behind them. that's I think really good idea. There is some kind of intimate connection between the. I mean, would you agree that the kind of unintelligibility or confused nature is just one of the elements in the dream? It's not the modus operandi for the dream, but it's just one of the elements that gets mixed up in the content.
I think it's related to what I was talking about with forget now, but like just this distinction between the sense and the intelligibility are the two main categories by which he's making these dream categories. And that the unintelligibility aspect is basically messing with our classical logic.
Yeah, so it could be basically that in our civilized normal self, the so-called classical logic here, we just need to transform our certain thoughts into unintelligible mess when we are working with them.
Can you go into what you mean by that?
So we might have like thoughts that are really not something that we would like to deal with. There are some kind of things going on always in our mental life. I would presume that perhaps Osho even has some, but very tiny portion. But there's some kind of unintelligible or some nonsensical stuff going on in our life all the time, and we are not able to deal with it. But when we are dreaming, all this stuff is included into the dream if we just go into it, but we do not do it.
Yeah, it's remarkable how little attention at most, like 99.9% of people don't pay any attention to their dreams, and they're not interested to. It's like this, like even the motive to go into dreams is even lacking.
Yeah, but also, don't you agree that some neuroscientists could learn a bit of here? So,
well, yeah, I think they
he's reproaching neuroscientists or the medical theory, so to say.
Yeah, that's great.
In which dreams are just kind of some kind of secretions of the brain or some kind of, I don't know, byproducts of some. Well, I don't know. When I was reminded immediately about when I was studying some neuropsychology at university, there was some lecturer on neuropsychology who was presenting the dream theories about what is according to the latest high-end science, what's the meaning of the dream. Well, basically she was presenting Freud as an obligatory like digression of the issue here at the lecture. So she was saying that, so there's this guy Freud who thought that dreams are meaningful, but nowadays we know that blah blah blah. But basically the way that she presented Freud was, well, she said that Freud believed that there are some kind of symbols, and she went, oh, for the love of God, don't believe in symbols. Don't believe in symbols. She went almost like hysterical about the fact that she, according to her, Freud believed in symbols. But the medical theory is already in Freud here. Freud is saying that there is a theory about dreams that they are just kind of secretions of the brains or something like that, that they're isolated from the normal waking life as some kind of different operation of the brain. And today they are saying that, oh, it's just brain waves. It's waves in the brain, and the brain interprets the waves and blah. That's the current like high-end scientific theory. I think that this is funny, but yeah,
it's absurd, of course. I mean, like it's the way in which, look, pure like when you're reading Freud, you're really you at least I get the impression that this is what it's like to read someone who actually discovered something and someone who's actually thinking. And when you're reading a lot of, whether you're reading about the particle physics at CERN or whether you're reading about brain scans and neuroscience, there's not actual thinking that's going on. They're just using advanced technology to observe things, but they're not developing deep theory.
Yeah, sometimes they are just using opinions that, like, I was going through some material that I found from a quick search about what's the latest theories about dreams in neuroscience. So what they're basically doing is that they're just like picking one opinion here, one opinion there, that presenting some kind of data, blah blah blah. But what they are doing, they're just picking opinions at the start. I mean, they are discussing Freud. They just pick some opinion there. They believe that they have some kind of understanding about what's going on. But when you actually read Freud, well, it's a whole another issue, since there must be some thinking going on in yourself also as you said.
I couldn't help thinking before you said something, Mika, about dreams being so ridiculous in some sense, that it's almost like I just came to think it's almost like maybe there's a possibility of taking another way out instead of associating, like it becomes so absurd that you can just say it's absurd.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? I mean, like a way of stepping out of it. It's almost like the extreme of a crisis makes you surrender to something. I don't know that.
Do you mean like putting on like a stamp to some issue and putting it metaphorically like a folder and?
No, more like the dreaming in itself becomes so ridiculous that I would say maybe if it gets so confused, maybe you could say that instead of trying to untangle it and digging into it, just dismiss it.
But the dream is not that different to conscious living or being conscious, because the subject is so divided and all over the place. So the dream will be like, if you think about the conscious and unconscious, at always, like what we think we are, we're not. We're men, we're so multiple.
How I'm responding, or how I'm feeling in relationship to what Mika's bringing up here about the neuroscientist, and it's a theme that's appearing more and more in my life that I feel like I'm getting the ability to make a more clear distinction, is it's not clear to me that there's any real tension between psychoanalysis and science as methods. What seems to me to be the problem is scientific egos. That right. Scientific egos have a resistance to even understanding what Freud's saying. And it's kind of like it's in psychoanalysis where scientists reach the limit of their own identity and they start acting hysterical or obsessional against Freud. So it's kind of like I think they're literally brought to the limits of their own mental capacity.
But also it's a resistance to actually reading the stuff. And
yeah, of course.
But there's the more deeper issue about some submission for some sort of, I would say, commonsensical view of the world, to which Hegel already in Phenomenology of Spirit presents his own arguments. So we should basically go against some kind of commonsensical view of the world. Mm-hmm. Since if we are already immersed in some worldview, what would be the point of scientific inquiry in the first place?
Exactly. And what happens among scientific egos is when they reach this level they basically reach the limits of their own scientific identity and they pretend to be philosophers, they always go into worldviews. And they become totally unscientific. They become religious in their worldview. And I think it does have this relationship to, I think the core word that you brought up here is important, is submission. Because I see in myself is that when you study psychoanalysis and you study libido, you're brought to something which your ego has to submit to. And I think that the rational scientific mind, it has such trouble understanding that it has to submit to something. It's to submit to something that's simple and stupid, like a wish fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like you have to submit to something which your complex, intelligent mind says, no, I'm much bigger than that.
Yeah, that's so interesting because how I would put it, is that, at least what I can see, what happens is that science, like, so we have psychoanalysis, which is totally concerned with meaning. We spoke about that in the first talk, that Freud is like, what are these words with their magical powers and this kinds of stuff. And then the scientists are, at least from what I see, like kind of spiritualizing their own science, which is supposed to have no meaning inside of it. It has, you know, it has to be objective, and psychoanalysis is really meaningful. Like there's so many traumatic meanings in psychoanalysis, Oedipus complex and all of this. So yeah, not wanting to submit to the meaning.
I would like to, there's a great quote. I actually came across it yesterday, so I have it right here, by Alfred North Whitehead, where he says, every scientific man, in order to preserve his reputation, has to say he disliked metaphysics. What he means is that he disliked having his metaphysics criticized. I think
that's exactly it. And the interesting thing Alenka Zupancic brings up is that in order for science to work, it doesn't really need to worry about metaphysical problems. So so here's the thing why there's actually no real conflict. I think this is so important. Like if we can get this clear, I think this is a huge valuable tool, because there need not actually be any conflict between scientific method and psychoanalytic method. There's actually, because scientific method can work just fine without worrying about deep metaphysical problems. It's just that the scientific ego it has identified too much with being a scientist, and it can't fit a coherent metaphysics inside its scientific identity.
That's also why all these kind of crazy theories in physics are coming up. I mean, you're trying to get out of
Exactly. That's the main problem with physics.
Then you have string theory. It's like there's no acceptance of nothing or of metaphysics. Yeah.
It's honestly that they think that the metaphysics upon which science was implicitly built, like for example Leibniz or Newton or Galileo, are like the horizon of metaphysics, and like they don't need to go through the last 3 centuries of philosophy. They think the last 3 centuries of philosophy are meaningless. Like at most, in the conversations I've had with scientists, it's like you could maybe get them to Hume, and then maybe you could get them to Kant, but nothing after Kant. It's like anything after Kant the scientific universe can handle it just fine. So that means all of the greatest 19th and 20th century philosophers, they see them as not even worth engaging with. So before we get too lost in this really interesting conversation, which I'm glad is spun around, I'm going to present the last part of On Dreams, and then we can hopefully discuss that. So I'm going to share my screen again.
Am I the only one hearing a lot of scratching?
Yeah, there was a disturbance about Cadell's microphone, I think.
Yeah, Cadell's microphone.
Was it my microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's making like a zzz sound when you speak.
Okay. Maybe maybe it was the way I was touching the chair, not my armchair. Hopefully it will.
Well, there is a common cure for technical problems. You take a fist and, just loud sounds.
I guess just to minimize, if everyone can press mute on their microphone, then we'll reduce as much background noise as possible. Okay. Part 3. Okay, so Freud claims here that when we get to the dream thoughts themselves, as distinct from the dream content, what we find is what he calls, quote, the nucleus of the dream. So the nucleus of the dream, he says, the dream thoughts are related to, quote unquote, impressive experiences often dating back to early childhood. What he means by impressive experiences are experiences which are high excitations. Those could be high negative or positive excitations. The dream thoughts, quote, are equal to a complex, intricate structure which has a foreground, background, conditions, digressions, illustrations, chains of evidence, counter-arguments, and contradictions. So basically what he's saying is that there's a complex scene at the core of the dream thought, which are related back to early childhood. And that the dream work are that the dream thoughts themselves, this original content, are being submitted to a pressure to condense, like we were talking about in dream displacement, for example. So this process of dream thoughts being transferred into the dream is that the dream thoughts combine into a single situation. And he gives an interesting example of, he compares the dream itself, which is transformed from dream thoughts, to like a painter representing poets as a conceptual group. So imagine the, like for example, the Renaissance painting of all the ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle into one conceptual group. Of course, that never actually existed in the world. It only existed in the painter's representation. And he's saying that the dream functions like this. So it presents things as a conceptual group, which is why we have to find the common element of the conceptual group. Like, for example, in the painting of the Renaissance painting of ancient philosophers, we could easily say, okay, the conceptual group is aesthetic, or we could say the conceptual group is philosophical, or something like this. Now we go deeper into the dream logic, like we've already talked about, is that the dream logic functions on the dream logic is functioning on a both and, where contradictory ideas are one and the same, whereas either or logic is never represented in the dream. So this is connected to the basic Freudian principle that in a dream, the core of the dream knows no no. So there's a famous Freudian saying, the dream knows no no. What that means is that the dream will take two contradictory elements and just put them together. So it just says yes to everything. Then dream as ego motive is that it's basically trying to inhibit movement, and that this is represented in the dream by a conflict of will or an absurdity. So for example, if you've ever had the experience of a dream where you can't move or you don't know how to move, he's saying that this is kind of one of the ego motives of the dream. It presents to us a conflict of the will. So adding to these mechanisms, like we've discussed, of condensation, displacement, and pictorial arrangement, the final mechanism we're discussing here is dream composition. And this is a really interesting function of the dream. And it reminds me here of the ego ideal, which is that it arranges the dream into a whole, and he equals whole to a facade. So, and also that the identity becomes attached to the dream composition or the whole facade. And this is very similar to the ego. So the ego will construct a whole, a wholeness, and that this wholeness becomes equal to its own identity. It's basically a symmetrical image, which has no cracks or has no gaps. Let's see. And that the dream composition here uses wish fulfillment fantasies and dream thoughts to represent familiar waking life daydreams. So it is here similar to the dream composition here is similar to the ego ideal. which is that it's using the original dream thoughts to turn it into some whole facade of something unrelated to the original dream thoughts. So there's mysterious here, this function occurring in the first place, and how we should deal with this sort of automatic process that goes on in our minds, where, you know, simplistic desires are presented to our ego already in a concealed way and sort of manufactured as a wholeness or manufactured as a facade. He describes this process as a higher intellectual operation that, a quote, and this is in his own words, he puts in capital letters, have taken over. So there's this type of intelligent agency, which is kind of, he's representing here also as like an alien intelligence, so this might be related to the previous sort of questioning about the intelligence of the non-intelligibility. There is an intelligence here in the non-intelligibility. And he represented it here as like, it's kind of like we're already captured. And that brings us to repression. So when we combine all these mechanisms, condensation, displacement, pictorial arrangement, and then dream composition, this all together, all of these motives together is what he's calling the repression and the dream distortion. So the condensation is like this superposition, this pressure. The displacement is that the original dream motive is lost and displaced. The pictorial arrangement is kind of the conceptual grouping that's achieved in a dream. And then the dream composition is the whole facade, which disguises the original motive. And I think all of these mechanisms are important to know, both for the way in which your own ego operates. He then makes a distinction between healthy and neurotic subjects, where he says healthy subjects are, this mechanism is working. Here's the crucial point. This mechanism is operating in both healthy subjects and neurotic subjects, but in healthy subjects, they're more likely to accept the dream thoughts themselves. So there's less repression, or they accept repression. They just say, yeah, okay, there's a conscious recognition of dream thoughts, the original dream thoughts. Whereas in the neurotic subject, he says that there's more repression and that they perceive these dream thoughts as being forced upon them. And this is basically connected to symptoms. So going into the fourth part. This is where he basically says that he clearly expresses his thesis of the dream, which is the dream is a wish fulfillment in itself, and that it behaves like, quote unquote, the popular mind or folk knowledge. So the crucial thing here is that a wish and a belief are the same thing. So that what the subject wishes, it believes. What the subject believes, it wishes. There's no difference between wish and belief. And that he says that this is how the popular mind functions. So basic here for the nature of the dream. He then gives another triadic categorization structure for the dream, depending on the attitude of the dreamer, which are it's important and already connected to the triadic scheme we discussed. And it also has the same developmental trajectory from infant to adult. So unrepressed, wish undisguised. So basically you just have the core wish. And he says in infants and children, you just have the core wish. Then you have another level of a repressed wish, but disguised. Majority of dreams, he says. And then finally, you have a repressed wish with an insufficient disguise. So this is a really important category of dream. And to me, this is maybe even the most important category of dream. So the reason why it's anxiety provoking is the reason why it's the most important category for me is because it's basically the type of dream which will wake you up. So like, for example, I've had a dream before where I've been eaten by velociraptors. And then I just wake up in a cold sweat. So it's literally this insufficient disguise, because it's not disguised well enough to keep me asleep. And it's, again, the core here of the drive gets turned on the ego itself. So me being eaten by velociraptors is, of course, my own killer drive being turned on myself. So I have to wake up. And this is really important dimension of the dream. So he says that we have no philosophy for psychological repression, and that this is a new philosophical topic. So he is here doing philosophical work, even though he's against philosophy in some sense. I think what he's against is sort of philosophy which is not fully psychologically grounded. So he says here, you have two agencies at work in the dream. You have the unconscious agency, which is the psyche in itself, which is this higher intelligence, which is, again, connected to why Lacan constantly plays with Descartes' notion of, I think where I am not, because he's saying here that the unconscious agency is intelligent. So there's an unconscious intelligent agency, which is the psyche in itself. And then you have the preconscious agency, which is the psyche, which has access to consciousness. And when this relationship gets too fluid, when the unconscious agency itself reaches consciousness, you will have the anxiety-provoking dream. So the unconscious psychic agency in itself is censored and repressed, and what becomes conscious is a compromise formation. So basically, our consciousness is a compromise formation with desire, a compromise formation with the world. And he also admits here, back to the original hypotheses of the ancient superstitious mind, that we are dealing with a type of, quote, demonic element, which is also involved in pathologies. And that here, related back to a previous conversation we were having about the dream, he claims that the most direct access to the meaning of a dream is in the forgotten fragment. So the fragment of it, so the way I think about it is when you have a whole scene, what you want to pay attention to is the fragment which doesn't fit. You have this perfect image which is presented, and you want to pay attention to the part that's imperfect, the forgotten fragment, the part that sticks out and disturbs the whole from within. Because the whole perfect image is the facade which has been constructed to keep you from the original dream thoughts. See, there's 2 slides left. So the reason this is kind of a little bit of rehash, but also important, is the dream is made obscure through repression. So the only reason why dreams are obscure is because of all this complex mechanisms of repression. And that the dream itself has made itself obscure to guard sleep. He uses the example of a night watchman. And he uses the metaphor of a night watchman looking over a town and keeping the town, like the society of mind, sleeping. And that the night watchman will only wake up the villagers if there's a disturbance, which you have to wake up the town, because I can't deal with all this disturbance. So kind of like that example of the dream of I'm being eaten by velociraptors and I have to wake up. So again, to rehash, children have a more direct access to, quote, true dreams, and there's less of a distinction between fantasy and reality. Whereas adults make a distinction between fantasy and reality, and that this distinction between fantasy and reality occurs because of failed desire. So fantasy becomes wish fulfillments, desires, which we know we can't have. And reality, or the reality principle, becomes basically our gray, mundane reality that we have to compromise with, that we have to constrain ourselves for. So again, just to rehash in the last point, the core of the dream is beyond repression and it provokes anxiety. So that's why Zizek says, for example, that the only true emotion is anxiety, because the core of the dream provokes anxiety. And then that the sensor wakes the subject up to prevent contact with the dream core, which is, quote, too much and overwhelming. And the final page, which might be like, I felt it was kind of like an interesting way in which basic Freudian theory comes into contact with Jungian theory, because he literally says, of course, we all know Freud's basic hypothesis that he thinks the core of the dream is infantile sexual wishes. So like the return to the womb or the return to the mother's breast or something like this. But also that dreams have symbolic significance with a universal significance. So he says the image of a king or the image of a queen are equal to a representation of parents. He says rooms are represented as persons, parts of the body, or erotic activities. That sharp weapons and long objects are representations of the penis. That cupboards, boxes, and carriages are represented as the uterus. And that dream symbols extend into the social. So the unconscious is also social. The unconscious is also transpersonal. So these same symbols of kings and queens, rooms, sharp weapons, long objects, cupboards, boxes, and carriages, these symbols are manifest in fairy tales, myths, legends, jokes, and folklore. And that these are the ways in which the subject is trying to reach the core representation of its desire. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and that's the end of the paper. I thought it was a super interesting paper. And what do you guys make of these last two sections where he's sort of formalizing the whole facade and basically the nature of repression? He basically developed his theory of repression here through the dream. Everin, could you just mute your microphone?
Sure.
Yeah. So he's basically just developing a psychological theory of repression through studying the dream material, and again comes to this interesting dimension of the core of the dream, especially in adults, as something that is potentially anxiety provoking. And in reading this paper, actually, in my own sort of therapeutic work, it kind of, for me, pointed towards some mystery of night terrors themselves. So I don't know if you guys know night terrors, but night terrors are examples where a subject wakes up but is still dreaming in its most terrible visions and with the most anxiety. So it's kind of like this third level of the dream, where the dream is trying to wake the subject up, but the subject wakes up and is still in a dream. So it's kind of like the failure of the dream to wake the subject up. And then there's this collision between the core of the dream and waking reality, which is terrifying for the subject. So it's kind of like the subject is in the most terrifying dimension of the dream while awake. This is very interesting. So I don't know, I open it up to conversation here.
Oh, I wanted to say that, wait, let me just turn on the mic. Yeah, that one of the things I've dreamt is that my teeth fell out. And I felt sad about this in the dreams always. And one of other dreams
Dimitri,
that I was native. Yeah.
Your internet connection's really bad.
Sorry.
I'm not sure. Hopefully, yeah.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Okay, let's maybe see. Hopefully it starts working. Maybe we pray.
Say it again. Say what you said again.
Am I back? Hello?
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, can I just finish?
Of course.
Okay, so basically in the dream, I ran to the bathroom. I got like the toilet paper and I just tried to make clothes with it. And then I went back to the class. But anyway, like he's saying that there's a social aspect of the unconscious, and I've heard more people saying that, you know, their teeth fell out or like they were naked in school and dreams like that. So yeah, I wonder what you think about this recurring of these kind of phenomena.
I've also, well, like that's why I was trying to emphasize this third aspect of the anxiety provoking dream that wakes you up as so important. Because I've also had these recurring anxiety provoking dreams. Like for me, it could be either like, I remember having dreams of being like, the ones that recur for me are being eaten or being killed. And like just before I'm about to be eaten or just before I'm about to be killed, I wake up. But I've also had dreams like you're describing where I'm being put in some very embarrassing situation, and it's usually connected to being naked. So I guess how I interpret that is like, again, like the nakedness of the child. Like it could be the nakedness of the child. It could be the nakedness of like the infancy. It could be and like that literally putting on clothes is a concealment. But of course, for me, the killing impulse is like where, to me, like the killing impulse is like turned back on the subject. So like if I'm being eaten in the dream, it's kind of like my own core is being turned back onto me. That's how I interpret the core of it.
I'm wondering about the mechanisms of what's going on in here. I'm trying to just fits them to my I don't know, worldview. But yeah, so basically what I gather is that there is some kind of intelligence going on, which it's not registered by the conscious mind in selecting the content, what kind of images to bring up, and how to diminish the excitations of the body and so on. So what's basically I think we are saying here is that there's some kind of intelligence working in us, some kind of agency, which is in a weird way, it's able to recognize the unwelcome things or the unwelcome anxiety provoking thoughts or whatever, even before they kind of occur to us. So there's kind of selection going on before the conscious mind. And what we read earlier, where Freud was reproaching the previous era of philosophy for only focusing on the lockdown manner, on the conscious inspection or the introspection, we would never reach this kind of agency in us. Some kind of intelligence is there, but we cannot reach it if we are limited in our worldview. But yeah, so what I'm wondering here is that what kind of value is then for us to go into this kind of, one could perhaps say, pre-imaginary mechanism or intelligence or the kind of functioning. So are we basically trying to get rid of the disturbing elements in us, or some kind of symptom or some aspect of our own mental life which troubles us? Or is that the kind of end game here? Or are these discussions solely for some other purpose? Or what do you think? What is the purpose of this kind of inspection then?
I think for me, if like, for example, if the core of my dream is like being eaten or being killed, it means that there's an aspect of my identity which is quote unquote a killer, or like, you know, like I have a violent impulse. And if I'm not aware of that violent impulse, and if I can't be with that violent impulse, it could escape in sort of symptomatic ways. Like I gave the example of the priest who has sex with little children. Like that would be the sex drive impulse. Like, and if you're not sort of aware of what you are, this this intelligence you're talking about, which is moving in us even without our conscious reflection, then it will come out in symptoms. So I think the end game is to be able to enjoy our symptoms in a socially integrated way without sort of becoming actually a killer or actually a rapist or actually a whatever.
So there could perhaps be one obstacle in one's worldview if one really believes that there is some kind of self-image that can be sort of made whole again, or there are these views of becoming whole again, or becoming like a single person with no disturbances. But what we are saying here, that perhaps there is no way we can reach a state where there's no disturbance, but we can sort of get along with each other and start working on some other issues than our own neurotic symptoms or whatever. I don't know, maybe that's going.
Yeah, I would.
There's this quote from Freud that's what psychoanalysis really offers is not some kind of heavenly place where one gets rid of everything, but just that our life is no longer any kind of neurotic hell or anything like that, but just ordinary boredom or ordinary misery.
Well, I don't know about the last part, but I definitely agree that like this. I'm very skeptical with this becoming whole, like this becoming whole with no disturbances. I think that the becoming whole with no disturbances is the ego preventing from contacting the disturbance. Like I feel like you have to go into the disturbance, be willing to look at it, being able to be with it deeply, as uncomfortable as it is, to be able to own that. And then I think once you can own that, you can sort of prevent yourself from being a real danger to others. And I think that that's a precondition to being genuinely helpful with others. So like, for example, like I can give you an example. So I've been in situations where it's hard for me to reject someone or hard for me to basically assert my boundaries with someone. And that would be me sort of repressing my actual killer instinct, which is that I have to cut. I have to own my ability to cut. And if I don't own my ability to cut and I just pretend like I'm some nice guy who will let anyone into my bubble, then actually I could hurt the person more than help them. So I have to be aware of, like, it's kind of like a precondition to being able to build a real bubble or a real boundary, to be able to actually understand your boundaries, to actually be able to build a whole. But it's never a whole that's like this perfect whole, which is free of disturbances. It's a boundary which is constantly dealing with potential disturbances. There's always snakes that could come into the garden. And you always have to have a sword out. And you have to own that I'm someone who has a sword. I have a sword. I could cut you.
But the sword
Sounds like
could be
authentic
words.
violence.
See,
Yeah, sorry, Freudian.
At some stage, the sword is like, get the F out of here. But at some another level of development, the sword could be very, very kind of clear utterances that really the other person just walks away.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering is about this kind of development comes into this, that in a way we move toward, I mean, maybe we move towards development and becoming. And I mean, the aim is to kind of become ourselves. But yeah, it's sort of like, it doesn't mean that these impulses are ever conquered or ever go away, but we manage them better. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much. I want to affirm what Dimitri said. It sounds kind of like the authentic phallus. I think doing this is a precondition to become an authentic phallus. And I think that what we're saying with the antagonism with science is that it's an inauthentic phallus because it won't really become psychologically reflective deeply. So just what you're saying here, Rashanik, is like, once you like, when we're saying authentic phallus, what we're basically meaning is that we're aware of our own speech. We're aware of the forces that we can't conquer, but we have to integrate into our speech. And they're impulses which are the very source of our life. You know, they're the life force.
This process involves self reflection. It like, you know, you see something out there that bothers you, you got to go back to yourself because it's not out there, it's in here. So it involves the constant self reflection. But yeah, it's not perfect in any way whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's very messy.
And I think the crucial thing that Mika brought up in relation to this self-reflection is that it's not this Lockean introspection just with my ego, like me just reflecting on my ego. Because there's this, what he's saying is that there's this intelligent process which is occurring even before you have any conscious recognition of your ego. So like, I mean, I guess what I try to do is pay attention to the most disturbing, emotionally exciting moments of my life. And I try to see if there's any distortion in these moments or whether they're fully intelligible to me. And also I'm open to the possibility that there are extremely disturbing moments of my life which I've already censored and I'm not even aware of them anymore. But I like, when I think about, like, for example, many of the times where I like really hurt myself as a child, or I was hurt by someone else, or I was in a terrifying situation, like when I've gone into those images, usually what I find is that my ego is a response to those events. Like the layers of my ego are a response to those events.
Yeah, it's in a way necessary for us to do this kind of reflective work when we are maturing or growing up, even one could say. And when you were saying that there is a way of recognizing some kind of cuts or distortions in social relations when you do something really unwelcome, or you act in a way that hurts others, but in a way that hurts can be integral to the kind of issue that you two are working over. So there is a way of recognizing the kind of wound of the Geist or whatever in a way that it doesn't anymore hurt the other participant in the discussion or the social situation more than necessary, one could say. And when you were saying that there is a recognition that you have a sword, you can cut things. Well, perhaps there is another issue than just throwing the sword around. I think I recognize this even more. There is a way that the sword never gets used. It sort of always stays in the one could say in the attic or whatever, and then it comes haunting you. And then when you use the sword, actually, you just only mess everything up. Everything gets fucked up, and it's just bad. So there's kind of pitfalls that we are trying to recognize before we get into them, or we are also sort of recognizing that there is a way that this kind of issues can make people hurt, and it's difficult. Yeah.
I honestly think it's so important for our culture, because it's basically like I think it's so important for our culture to become more and more conscious of whatever we mean by the phallus or the sword or the whatever, because like I just can reflect on it for me personally is like like I just have such a deep part of my ego, which I don't want to hurt other people, but it's kind of like, in order to stay true to myself, it's kind of like hurting other people is inevitable, or else I have to not be with my truth. And so I think like a lot of people are doing what Mika's saying, which is they put their sword in an attic and they pretend they don't have a sword, but then the sword haunts them from within.
Yeah,
So
yeah. What I'm thinking of is, in particular, I think that maybe the kind of hippie ideal of always staying the
It's
same
like
way.
Rousseau.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like Rousseau. Like Rousseau would be like, "Why can't we all just get along?" Like there's this funny. I don't know if any of you guys watch South Park or Cartman, but Cartman is like this figure that Matt Stone and Trey Parker put all of their unconscious id into. And like Cartman has this line where he says in a very sarcastic and childish way, "Why can't we all just get along, guys?" Like, but he's sort of, when he's saying that, he's sort of like, it's funny because Cartman is like this wild sword. He's like this sword that goes around just cutting everyone just as much as possible, just in this unrepressed id manifestation. And like, so he's the exact opposite of why can't we all just get along? And at the same time, he says that in this very sarcastic way. But like, yeah, like in regards to like 1960s culture, for example, like Mika's saying about the hippie ideal, like any type of romanticism, any type of hippie, can't we just all get together in a community and just hold hands and peace and love and stuff, like, or like in the spiritual community, they have love and light. Like, it's just all love and light. No, it's not. it's not all just love and light. You know, like we have to come to terms with the sword. We have to come to terms with we're actually dangerous. And that becoming dangerous, I feel like integrating the fact that we're dangerous is also the precondition to actually doing something good in the world. Like if you look at stuff like Osho's come up a bunch of times already in this talk. Osho was not an innocent, peaceful guy. Osho had a sword. He knew he had a sword. And he used his sword, and he caused a big mess.
And basically the way that Rousseau would solve this issue would be to write some kind of book where he's explaining to everybody so that they can learn that there was this pure inner self, which was always innocent and never wanted any harm to anybody. So you must understand, you must listen, you must obey to the rule. I don't know.
You must. The weird thing about that is that I find that to be more violent.
Yeah, that's right. That's not recognized by the person who's explaining to you. So
that's their sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zizek said that to beat the shit out of the enemy, first you have to beat the shit out of yourself. I love that. You can't just do it.
Absolutely. I love this.
But there is a way of beating ourselves in a way that we are actually beating others when we think that we are engaging with our own sort of. Huh? So I think that there is a way in which this project can go awry when we actually are doing some kind of aggressive work towards others when we should instead aim it towards ourselves. And we think that we are doing it to ourselves, but we are actually not doing it to ourselves. We are doing it to others.
I think this point is so fundamental. I wanna stay on it for a bit, and I want to also give an example of how like studying psychoanalysis reveals parts of your own interest in media, which gives you a new perspective on yourself. So like just to re-emphasize what Dimitri's saying about Zizek's quote, to beat the shit out of the enemy, we have to beat the shit out of ourselves first. The way I'm formulating it in my own life is like, if I start out in pure lack, like if I'm aware of all my bullshit, if I'm aware of all the ways I'm lacking, no one else can touch me. Someone else can mess me up only if I have the facade that I'm this great entity. But if I fully reveal all of my lack, then no one can touch me. So like, I want to give the example of like my favorite piece of media from a teenager. And like now I have a psychoanalytic reason why I liked it. It was the final, this is going to sound funny to you guys. It was the final rap battle in 8 Mile. Like in the final rap battle of 8 Mile, Eminem has a competitor in a freestyle, and how he freestyles against his competitor is he mocks himself. The entire freestyle, he says, you know, I am a bum, I am white, I am this, I am that. Everything you're going to say against me, I already said against myself.
Yeah, it's great.
And then the competitor can't say anything because he already destroyed himself. And so this is the weird nature of the unconscious. And I think that I want to even go maybe further into this on the nature of the death drive, because I think it's relevant, is the ego always wants to stage a scene where it wins. But the crucial thing is to see victory in defeat. You have to be able to stage the scene of your own ultimate loss. Like, I'm already dead. Okay, I'm already dead, now I can do anything.
Yeah, that's really nicely put. I would perhaps make an odd comparison here and say that the way that I project this kind of victory is that when I go to the, I think maybe when I go to the store and try to pick up what kind of coffee I should drink or what kind of tea, then I come up with the idea that I must have the strongest and the best kind of coffee. And then when I start to grab the kind of strongest coffee, my hand kind of slips and I take the weaker one, and then I go home and drink it. And that's the kind of victory that I kind of project.
These mechanisms are hilarious. This is therapy for me.
Yeah, and also another example, and when I'm picturing that I should listen to some kind of really great music, I must come up with the best music. I must see the best show ever. Then I start picking on them, and I come up with, yes, that's the one. And then I slip and I take the one that's next to it, and just it suffices and it's okay, but it's not the best.
You know what would be terrifying is if this same mechanism in your mind was applied to your significant other.
Oh no, that's not true. That's not true.
Okay, you won't do it. Oh, just pick that's too much.
Well,
okay.
actually, there was a film, a French film with Gerard Depardieu called Too Beautiful for You. He had the most beautiful wife, this French actress. She was beautiful. And he fell for his frumpy, overweight secretary.
That's so true.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird. You know what it is? I think we get a clue to what this is in when Freud's describing the dream facade, like how the dream constructs this whole facade, which the identity attaches to very closely. So like the very beautiful woman would be like the whole facade, and then your identity attaches to it, but then you get interested in this little weird fragment, which would be like the frumpy secretary, and then you fall in love with the front, and then you find your truth in what destroys the facade.
Well, that's right, because the facade is a facade. It's precisely a facade.
That's why I say
so-
this is my mechanism. Whenever I meet New Age mystics who identify with the wholeness, like everything is connected to everything else, like everything is love and light. I'm always most interested in their little daily disturbances. Like, what is their little food addiction, for example? Like, do they have a drinking addiction? Do they have some sort of weird tic? I find their truth right there.
Yeah, and what's the issue with hating the mother so much, or something like that?
Well, I could give maybe no. I don't want to. I say I got to stop myself from going too far.
You're getting excited.
I gotta stop myself. But this is. I want to pretend that I'm a true facade right now.
That's right.
There's almost, or sometimes there's also like almost a impotence in like the spirituality, kind of like confirming each other's.
Delusion.
There's a lot of recognition going on.
Mm.
Like I noticed that. Like
the crucial thing is if someone's belief system, spiritual belief system, seems to require the other person's recognition in order for them to believe it.
yeah, exactly.
Like, I need you to believe so that I can believe.
But the problem or the strange thing I see sometimes going on is like two people appreciating each other and in the same movement kind of castrating each other.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
I think it's back to this issue of the sword.
Yeah.
Wait, do you mean like just calling out a friend, hey, you're a fucking asshole, man, just and thereby making friendship? Like that's a real friendship when you can,
Yeah.
Just shit on the
Definitely.
person.
Definitely. That's so true. Yeah. That's a great marker for true friendship, I think.
It's funny to do it. I love it.
I think there's just this crucial motion in the idealization and it's beyond. It's like if you're only friends because you're confirming each other's image of each other, then that's just it's very fragile and it's a weak foundation for a friendship. But that's why I think if the foundation of the friendship are each other's lack, like you can poke fun at each other's lack, like, haha, yeah, you're nervous around this woman, or whatever it is, the little weird thing about me that only my friends know, then that you're in the lack already. So you're building a real connection.
Is that a reflection of the movie with the French movie? He chooses the lack.
Well, yeah, it's almost like, yeah, on the surface of it, like he's got the perfect wife, but she's kind of a bit dead inside, and this frumpy, older, bigger woman has a lot of heart, and yeah, just kind of, and he's lonely, and they just start talking and getting to know each other. So it's almost like what seems like that mirroring that goes on when you're thinking, you're feeding off each other and thinking, oh, this is good, this is good, this is good, and then it all breaks down. Like most friendships, eventually there's a fight or an argument or a hurt. So it's almost like the mirroring can go on for a while, where reality comes in. So yeah, he had this beautiful wife. She was a ballerina. She was this, she was that, but the cracks start to show. And I think most like when maybe the challenge of a real friendship is having a kind of a fight or having a big, and then being able to survive it and still being able to be with that person.
I think like the lack thing, I thought about that because for me, I think it's like crucial to acknowledge the lack, because if you don't, you will compensate for it. I mean, it becomes a compensating structure. But I'm worried about like the total identification with the lack. So it's not the story. It's not my story of my bad childhood or whatever. I mean, I acknowledge it so that I can forget about it, make it irrelevant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think when it's like there are problems with the full identification of the lack, but like it's like it's not, like, to me, when you're beyond all that, it's kind of like you are the lack itself, or you are the crack itself.
Of course.
Like, it's like, so like, I think, and I feel like this mechanism is already revealed in this paper, where you have the whole facade of the dream. And he says, to get to the core of the dream, you have to identify the fragment which breaks the facade. But then you are just the crack.
Yeah, but yeah, and exactly, it's like the coming to the understanding that the perfect in the imperfect, like there is only something because of division.
Like it's exactly like what who smoke cigarettes, for example, is like they constantly, while they smoke cigarettes, they're constantly beating themselves up, like, about smoking cigarettes. Like, oh, I should stop. This is unhealthy for me. I should stop smoking. Like, why am I smoking cigarettes and stuff like that? And then they spend their entire life beating themselves up by smoking. It's like, just do a perspective shift on the act of smoking itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're already there. Like, you need, like, if you actually want to stop smoking, you're going to have to substitute this enjoyment for an enjoyment which is authentically going to replace it. But if you're not, then just enjoy it, that you're already there.
Yeah, exactly. Kierkegaard had, I don't remember, he has the story about the drunk. Like, I don't remember it exactly, but it's like exactly that. Taking.
I'm going through this process with a guy in a men's circle in London when he had a porn addiction, but his porn addiction is being fueled by his own prohibition against porn. So he's beating himself about it, makes it into a worse addiction than it is, instead of just enjoying where he is.
In a way, the porn is here absolute, or would you agree that there is some kind of absolute or some kind of in itself which is preserved as somehow shifted or somehow filtered through the porn or the cigarette or whatever is the content. So what we are saying here is not that there is no absolute, only that this absolute in a way appears only in this crack or in this.
Exactly.
As Zizek says, it's this absolute is in absolute recoil, as he says. It's there is no direct access to any absolute, but the absolute is not unreal in this sense. It's only some kind of absolute that appears as some kind of loss, that of which is this loss of. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, isn't this lack, we're talking about the absolute itself? I'm talking about the real in Lacanian terms. Because this distinction between reality and the real, I think was Zizek saying that reality is for the ones who cannot sustain the dream. So isn't this lack that we are facing in our dreams is somehow this lack shattering our reality? So can't we say that it's also the absolute? The absolute is something barred, missing, lack, or are we talking about two different things here? I mean, this is what.
Well, absolute definitely manifests. It's a definitely yes to the fact that absolute does manifest. But if we are discussing about real, it's opposed to reality. It's real or reality, but in absolute, it's just the philosophical absolute or the appearance which somehow brings life to absolute. I think that's a really good question.
Cadell,
I
can
want
I
to ask a
ask
question
you
about this.
something? So you
Oh, go ahead, Megan. No, go ahead.
No, you go. I'll ask after you.
Okay. Yeah, I had a question about, okay, so you have this smoking person, drinking, porn, whatever, and they are prohibiting their own enjoyment, and thereby they're enjoying it. So, Cadell, what you are saying is just remove the prohibition, just enjoy it? And then the person will make the perspective will shift. Is that
So I'm saying you're caught up in your enjoyment is being caught up in this loop of self-prohibition, and that if you want to actually make, like, okay, of course I don't have all the answers, but this is my intuition. If you want to make it, this is my and this is what I apply to myself. If you want to make progress on those little ticks, whether it's eating, masturbation, smoking, whatever it is, that remove the prohibition and just observe the in itself of the enjoyment. And in order to actually make progress, you're gonna have to find an authentic substitute of enjoyment in order to actually move anywhere. Because you can't, it's like a libidinal economic thing. Like if you just try to prohibit it, you're always going to be in an antagonism.
Well, doesn't it also necessarily include some kind of reflection on how would his life look like if there was some kind of father figure or some kind of authority for him, which would consciously like say that do it, it's your duty, go on, smoke, it's good for you, would consciously like be encouraging the smoking. That would be in a way contrary to his worldview.
I can say, like, I smoked for many years and I only stopped once. And I did it by just making one rule. I had to not do anything else. So no talking, no phone, no nothing. I could smoke as much as I want. I had to go outside, sit with my cigarette and only focus on smoking it. And that made me stop quite easily, actually. So easy that I thought I could start again.
I have gone through the same thing myself, but nowadays I have begun to smoke the bigger, like this, what was the name? It's losing me. What Freud smokes? Cigars, you know. So that's my substitute in my economy.
But any compulsion, sorry.
No, go for it, Rosanna.
Any compulsion or any behavior that's compulsive, that's repetitive, that you don't have control over, usually has within it an element of, well, philosophically we're talking about the kind of the antagonism. Psychologically, it manifests, or it can be conceptualized as shame. So the pornography follower feels shameful about watching pornography, so they keep watching pornography. So once the shame is addressed, then the obsession or the addiction is able to be let go of.
So the addiction
yeah,
is
this
shame.
is so interesting. Because this is, it can be with anything. So, but where does this shame? What is shame then even?
Well, I think it is that conflict. It is that it's the split subject, and I suppose
it's owning that you are the monster.
Yeah. So that's right. So the aggression, often with addictions, the aggression is externalized, or it's sort of disavowed, or the drive.
The way I think about it is like there is a constant tension because there is being. Like for me, that is tension. And so what compulsion does is it covers the tension in some sense. So if you can that's why I also say it's very powerful in any situation if you can stay with the tension without relieving it. Even in a conversation with somebody, say it's a traumatic event, somebody died, you try to relieve the tension by going for like comforting the situation, saying something. But the non-compulsive thing is to be with just what is. And that's also like what I like to think of as that could maybe be more like the comforting way. But it's also a very masculine thing. It's like, you don't go for you don't break I mean, tension is sexual in that sense also.
But it's a way of not being with the tension. So the behavior is a way of relieving the tension.
Yeah.
But in itself, it creates more tension.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a spiral.
Yeah.
So you constantly cover up your anxiety with a new pleasure. Like,
the way I see it is to go some kind of pseudo-Lacanian terms here. It's some sort of difficult or paradoxical enjoyment of the superego here. It's some kind of weird or twisted enjoyment we cannot really reconcile in our normal daily conscious inspections. But it's also doing it shame. What is really shame? Isn't it, in a way, to enjoy also?
Yeah, okay. So it's more complicated than just covering up anxiety. There's something more going on. Yeah.
Well, shame is existence. Is, like it's like the shame of, I don't know. I wonder if at the core of it is like being born or being created or exist.
Promethean shame.
Yeah.
So linked to those first sexual experiences and then that repetition of trying to work out the shame.
I mean, yeah, I think it's gradients of it. Like there's a primal shame, and I think you're further shamed if you are living in shame. With parents who have a lot of shame that they haven't dealt with. I think we all have shame. I mean, it's just kind of being seen, existing, being judged. Yeah, and shame is interesting. I think. It's complex. Yeah, there's actually a talk on it by an analyst I can send it to you guys. A guy by the name of Michael Eigen, who's a psychoanalyst from New York City, and he's got a series on it. If you're interested, I can email it. I'll post it up on the Facebook page.
All right, that would be great, Rashanik. So we're coming up on 2 hours and 30 minutes. So I want to close out here. But I think this On Dreams is, really an impressive work, and it's really an impressive continuation of his early work. And I guess just to rehash, there's some of the major points. What he's saying is that both the idealistic mystical interpretation of the dream and the scientific medical interpretation of the dream are kind of both lacking, and that in order to understand what the dream is, he's introducing this core distinction between the latent and the manifest dream content. He's identifying a mechanism by which latent dream thoughts get turned into the dream picture we remember when we wake up. He's identifying a mechanism in reverse process where we take the dream content and we try to understand what the original dream thoughts are. And then finally, he's saying that when we do this process, not only do we understand that children have a more direct connection to the dream thoughts, but that when we unravel the dream content of adults, what we reach are very erotic primal impulses being filtered through complex symbolism. And that complex symbolism, things like kings, queens, rooms, sharp objects, and so forth, are representations of sexual difference. They're representations of the drama of our erotic life, the drama of our intimate life, and so forth and so on. So I want to thank, I mean, this has been probably the most lively discussion and interaction we've had so far. To let all of you know, I'm doing these every 2 weeks. I let everyone know in the Facebook group about the date and times. I'll try to notify everyone in advance as much as possible about the readings. And that the whole activity of this motion is really to go back to read the core materials of great thinkers is my overall desire, because, you know, there are so many thinkers that, you know, never actually read the original content of the theorists that they use. So I really think it's important to take our time, be really deep with going into the deep conceptualization, and to familiarize ourselves with what it looks like when someone discovers something. What does it look like when someone really discovers something? So that's what I want to leave you all with. I thank you again for all your time, and encourage you to join me on the rest of this process, because you know, without the collective aspect, it really loses something, and this really gives a lot to everyone, I think. So thank you all for joining me.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Cadell.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Cadell.
Thank you, Cadell.
Nice to
Bye-bye,
see you
everyone.
guys.
Bye.